Hey everybody, it's Deb from Queer Astrology. Things have been amazing. The book is now out, so make sure if you haven't checked that out on Amazon yet, you go check it out. The link is in my bio for the book. But what you see behind me right here, this is something you may see in CoStar, right? Now, CoStar is a great app, but as an astrologer, it's not the best app to understand your chart, right? So here at Queer Astrology, I take the gender binary out of astrology, but I also teach astrology. And not just like blah, blah, blah. I'm actually break it down so that you can understand the parts of your charts and then read it together. All right. So, as an example, this is from CoStar. What does it tell you, right? This is what they call their table chart, okay? They do have a round chart as well, but this table chart, all that this tells you, here's your signs, right? These are the placements. Those are the placements. Those are the signs that those are in, and here's the houses that those are in. But what about all the other signs and all the other houses that are in your chart? We're not even going to talk about them. That's craziness, right? So they do have this circle chart, they call it now, right? And it's a little bit better because you can kind of barely faintly in there, you can see where the houses are. You can see where everything is. You can see all 12 signs. They even have some aspects, although they're not color coded. My point is, this chart looks like this on other sites. Do you see what I'm saying? Now I can see clearly the signs, clearly where the houses are, clearly where the placements are, and the color coding of the aspects. Now, what the heck did I just say? Well, that's what this live is about. So, folks, here is a round chart. These are the parts of the round chart that we look at as astrologers. So here we go. We're going to start out here with the outside edge. You can see where these are the zodiac signs, right? And what they represent in your chart, that is the personality. So what you think of when people make jokes about certain signs or give certain personality traits to sign, that's what we're talking about right there, okay? The personality. Then when we talk about the houses, which is right here, you can see it starts on the left side, going counterclockwise. Okay, you can see that they each have a little slice of pie that's going around here. These represent a part of your life. So all of us have all 12 signs and all of us have all 12 houses. Where they sit and the size of the houses and things like that, that differs for everyone. Now, I use Western style Placidus, okay, which is the most commonly used amongst astrologers. That being said, the points are these glyphs right here. Now, in this case, and what we read in most readings are the planets, right? The luminaries of the moon and the sun, as well as some particularly important mathematical points like your rising sign and your MC, okay? Also known as your midhaven. And each of them, what they're actually doing, they're not this all powerful thing that goes into your chart. They're bringing a focus, okay? So, as an example, the moon, its focus is emotion. So, if the moon is sitting here in your chart, that's where your emotion is. The personality that it's going to have is going to be the sign that it's under, right? And then the house that it sits in is the part of your life where you will see emotion is the most affected, okay? Now, also, I just want to say, just because your sun or your moon is here doesn't mean you don't have emotions other places. That's just where it lives, okay? So, finally, last but not least, that we're showing on this right here are the aspects, okay? That's these crazy lines that go through the middle. What those are doing is showing us the relationship between your focus points, okay? So, how they're getting along, if they're working together or not. Astrology isn't something that tells you have to do something, can or can't do something. What it's for is to help you better understand who you are as a person. It's your particle entanglements with the rest of the universe. So let's go ahead and start out with the signs. So here are the 12 zodiac signs, okay? And they're always in this particular order. What I mean by that is they're not going to necessarily, Aries isn't necessarily going to be right here on your chart. That's not what I mean. But they always go in the same order, meaning it's Aries, then Taurus, then Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, and so on. Why is that? Well, what these are representing in the actual sky are constellations. These constellations are called the zodiac constellations, and they happen to be on something we call the ecliptic. That's why these particular ones are the zodiac ones. Because they're constellations, they're not going to move. They're always going to stay in the same order. The Earth is actually what's moving. But why these 12? There's 88 total constellations. Well, like I said, that imaginary line called the ecliptic, that is the path that all of the planets take, including the luminary of the sun and the moon. So that's why these particular constellations are literally the backdrop, okay, of the path of the planets. That's why there's 12 zodiac constellations. There's not 13 zodiac signs. There is Ophiuchus, which is right here in the world of constellations, right? There's also Pegasus. There's Orion. There's a lot of different ones that are along there. These are simply mascots for a time frame. When you say, like even other kinds of astrology say, well, we do it when it's actually, the sun is actually in that constellation. That's not true. The sun is only in the constellation of Aries for 5 days. Okay? It's in Virgo for 45 days. So these are simply mascots that they use to know when it was time to harvest, when it was time to plant, any of those kinds of things. That's literally how it started. So that being said, the signs represent personalities. So where did we get that from? In Western astrology, I should say, we have 4 elements and we have 3 modes over here. What the heck is any of that? Well, the elements, they are the baseline energy that is given to the signs. So for fire signs, this is passion. That is their baseline. When it comes to earth signs, their baseline is structure. When it comes to air signs are intelligence. Water is emotion. But if you have 3 passions, 3 structures, 3 intelligence, and 3 emotions, how do you tell them apart? That, folks, is where the modes come in. The modes are the action that's given to that baseline. So each of these has a different action. The top one is called the cardinal signs. The cardinal signs, they are the initiators. For Aries, as an example, the initiator of passion. Now, something else, because in Western style Placidus, we do the seasons. Each of the cardinal signs is not only the initiator of their baseline, they're also the beginning of a season. So check this out. The initiator of passion begins spring. Hello. When else would there be initiation of passion? All the animals are having their babies, all that stuff, right? Then we have the initiator of structure, which begins winter. Capricorn is the initiator of structure beginning winter. You shore up your house, you're cutting wood down for the winter, those sort of structural things. Then we have the initiation of intelligence is the fall, when of course school begins, right? Then we have the initiation of emotion, which is the summertime. Woohoo! So check this out. Fixed signs, right? What are they about? The name says they're stuck, right? Fixed to something. That's because they really enjoy the baseline. They want to be about the baseline, but they want to add a little extra flavor to it. As an example, the fixed signs are the fixers. They want to pep it up or adjust it or one of those kinds of things. So let's go through each of them really quick. So here we go. Fixed passion from Leo, right? This is adding creativity to passion. You see that? Taurus, it's adding security to structure. Aquarius, we add the unique intelligence. So like out of the box thinking, if you will. Then we have Scorpio, which is the investigator of emotion. So those are the things that they're kind of adding to that, if you will. Then we have the mutable signs. These are the finishers. As an example, the finishers, they're the end of whatever that might be. So for passion, as an example, mutable passion is Sagittarius, right? So that means the finisher of passion, what the heck? This is the experience of passion, right? This one is the details of structure. This is the expression of intelligence. And this is the intuitiveness of emotion. So that's how we can tell them apart. They have their action and then they have their baseline energy. This is the order that they go in on the chart, okay, and the constellations. It goes Aries, Taurus, Gemini, right? Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. When we look at this, there it is. See, Aries, Taurus, like we're just got to Gemini season, then it's Cancer season, and so on. Check this out. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. Check this out. Fire, earth, air, water. Fire, earth, air, water. Fire, earth, air, water. If you like my teaching style at all, I have a book available on Amazon. It will be the only astrology book you need for reference forever. We're going to go into the houses, and this is a fairly difficult part of astrology, right? And I use Western style Placidus, okay? And Western style Placidus, this is what it looks like, right? You can see I've turned everything off except for the signs are here and the houses. And the part that people are confused by is that these don't line up, right? And a lot of people will be like, whole sign, they line up. That's easier for me to understand. Because the number one question I get asked is, what happens if I have an empty house? Well, you don't have an empty house. First of all, there's 25,000 different astral bodies within astrology that we turn on, okay? Or can turn on. But besides that, every house has a sign that rules it. So how the heck do we know which one that is? Well, this is what we do. We look for the lead line because as you can see, these aren't exactly 30 degrees. All of the signs are. So we want to find that lead line. So as you can see, here's the first house. Always right here at this point is your ascendant. So this is everybody's point of origin in their chart and where their first house starts. Then you can see this little slice of pie. So whatever's sitting on the lead line as you go around, here's the second house, the third house, and so on. That is the sign ruler for that house. Let's go over what each of the houses mean. The first house is the house of self. So self-understanding and self-realization. The second house is about security, value, and money. The third house is your language, how you think and communicate. Your fourth house is the house of home or your domestic life. Fifth house is creativity and pleasure. The sixth house is your house of routine, your daily acts of service. The seventh house is connections, relationships, not just for romantic relationships, but long-term relationships, family, friends, coworkers. The eighth house is the house of rebirth, transformation, death, and the occult, things like that. Then we also have the ninth house. The ninth house is the house of experience, travel, higher education, philosophies, even spirituality. The 10th house is your ambitions, achievements. 11th is your social house. So what kind of social groups you want to be a part of and what your role is within social groups. And then finally, last but not least, the 12th house is the house of intuition and dreams. So each of those are part of your life. This is an example, whether they're tiny in size or they're big, they still are in your life and they are a part of your life. All right, now that we understand, right? Aries is the first house ruler. Welcome to the team. So right here, the first house of self is ruled by Aries. Aries personality tends to be quick. They're about quickness and youthful energy, right? So youthful self is what that could indicate without any placements in there. You see what I'm saying? The second house is, we go to the lead line, Taurus. The second house is value. Taurus is security, right? So secure value. The third house is ruled by Gemini, you can see. Fourth house ruled by Cancer. See that? The fifth house also ruled by Cancer. Do you see that? See how close? That lead line for this fifth house right here, it hits Cancer. So Cancer is the ruler of the fourth house and the fifth house. What does that mean? It means Cancer is nurturing, right? So the fifth house is the house of creativity. The baseline energy for your house of creativity and pleasure is going to have to do with nurturing. Leo takes up the majority of the house, but it is not the main energy. So nurturing is the lead-in for creativity and pleasure. Adoration is the secondary feeling, okay? That being said, when we look at the sixth house, you can see the sixth house is ruled by Leo. So now Leo will be, you'll be seeking adoration through your daily routines or your acts of service. But there's something important I want to show you here. Look at Virgo, okay? Here's 30 degrees of Virgo. It doesn't rule any houses, okay? This is what we call an intercepted sign, okay? And people are always like, that means it's not as powerful. It still has 30 degrees of power. It's just not ruling any particular part of your chart, right? In this case, all of its degrees happen to be in the sixth house. So it still has 30 degrees. It could even have placements in there for all we know, right? But the sixth house is going to start off, and its main energy is seeking adoration through what it does every day. This will be like, I'm going to make sure the details get taken care of too. And then also a little bit of balance in there. If you like my teaching style at all, I have a book available on Amazon. It will be the only astrology book you need for reference forever. This is the part where I want to show you why and where there's some confusion between, hey, which one do you do? Do you do modern or whatnot? Okay. So I do Placidus, okay? The Placidus housing system is a Western style, tropical astrology. Why is it called that? It's because we use the seasons based on the tropics. So look at this really quick for me for a second. This right here, you can see this green line in the middle. That's the equator. This blue line is the meridian. That's the 0 longitude line, okay? Now, here we have the Tropic of Cancer. You can see that little dashed line. And here's the Tropic of Capricorn, tropical astrology. That is because, see this orange line right here? That's the ecliptic. What's the ecliptic? Where the zodiac constellations are. And this moves like this throughout the year, hence the seasons changing. That's why this is tropical and seasonal. We use the ecliptic and how it moves. That's how we use it in Placidus, all right? Now, when you're looking at, as an example, when we go to, let's use whole sign because it's the oldest. If we're talking about whole sign, this is their housing system, okay? You can see how all the houses are lined up nicely with the signs. Lots of people love that, okay? It's an Eastern style practice, and it's sidereal, some Vedic, and they use the entire visible sky. Okay, what do I mean by that? Is they use everything, not just where the zodiac constellations are, not just the ecliptic, but all the visible sky. So what that means is they don't have a difference between the North Pole of the equator and the North Pole of the ecliptic. In Placidus, this is the ecliptic. It never goes more than 23.4 degrees. I've tilted it like that on purpose. Here's its North Pole. Here's its South Pole, right? This is the equator. Just for funsies, it's straight across so we can see the difference, right? There's your meridian. Here's your equator. So when you put these two on top of each other, look, that right there, that is why the houses look like this in Placidus and not perfectly aligned. Because in whole sign, they just have the North Pole. That's all they're using. They're not using this pole. That's also why the further away from the equator you're born, the crazier difference like this. This person was born in Sweden. So people always ask me what's more accurate. I think that the Western style modern is more accurate now, because we are staying in tune with the seasons as it's moving through. But I honestly, it's whichever one resonates more with you. And I'm going to show you the literal difference between the two charts as an example. Here's Placidus up here, the same chart we've been looking at. Here's whole sign, same chart we've been looking at. This is what's the interesting or where you're going to see the difference, okay? Look at this. At 11 degrees of Aries is this person's rising. ASC stands for ascendant or your rising sign. For Placidus, that is your point of origin. It begins your chart. Why is that? This is the constellation that's rising in the east at the moment that you're born. Now that applies for both, okay? And so that's why it's counted as the rising sign. So you can see here, it's also at 11 degrees of Aries. See that? But it's not a starting point, it's just the starting house, okay? So here it's a point of origin, here it's a house of origin. So at 11 degrees is where your chart starts here. At 11 degrees, it says, oh, your rising sign's Aries. That's the first house. And it just automatically lines the first house up with whatever it was rising there, no matter what the degree. From 0 to 29 degrees, if you're a rising, you would have it looking like this in your whole sign. Whereas someone who in Placidus, no matter where it is, it depends on the actual degree. You see what I mean? So you can kind of see the difference between them. So that's why whole signs, theirs just are lined up because the North Pole and what they're observing is lined up perfectly. Now, this is the thing is that like we are in astrology, we're Earth centered. Okay. This is for all the different kinds of astrology. So we're Earth centered. And again, you can see this green line, that is the equator. Okay. This blue is representing the meridian. Now, that being said, you can see this orange thing here, that's our ecliptic. See how I wrote ascendant right here, descendant right here? That is where the ecliptic and the equator meet, right? Your ascendant is the eastern hemisphere. So whatever's rising in the east that hits the equator, that's your rising sign. So on the opposite side of the world, the western hemisphere, whatever is hitting the ecliptic and descending is your descending sign. Where the ecliptic hits the meridian, that's the 0 degrees going north-south, that's where your MC and IC are. And folks, those are 4 major mathematical points that we have, especially in Placidus, because they show us your different quadrants. So here, this is literally what you're looking at when you're looking at this round chart for yourself. The ecliptic, the equator, the meridian. If you're loving the way I'm teaching, you can get my book. I also teach in my readings. So if you're interested in getting a reading from me, I have those as well. So make sure you check out here. Go to the link in my bio to my link tree. Click there to go get the book. You can also book services with me as well as some other cool stuff like my celebrity and reality star readings and stuff like that too. Okay. So I'm showing you these 4 points because we're getting ready to go and talk about the points in astrology, right? So these quadrant points, like I said, they establish for us, here's your first quadrant, your second quadrant, third, fourth, basically 1 through 3 houses, so on. This is a hemisphere, that's a hemisphere, 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 okay? So now this is how we have it set up. And then wherever any of the other placements are that happen to be in the sky, remember, this is the ecliptic. So they're going around here somewhere. Equator, meridian, right? So let me talk about what each of these is just really quick before we go to the rest of the placements. Your rising sign, like I said, ascendant, rising sign, it's your point of impression, your first point, or your first impression. How you first see things that are new to you and also how people first see you when they meet you. Then we have the IC down here. This doesn't get talked about a lot. It's not really in readings. The IC stands for enum coli, which is Latin for bottom of the sky. This is the point of your roots, okay, where you're growing from. Descendant is here always on the cusp of the 7th house, and we don't really talk about that in readings either. But what it is your point of connections, okay? It's when you start making connections with others. And then we do discuss this one. This is your MC, medium coli in Latin, also referred to as your midhaven. It's your point of ambition. let's talk about placements. So placements, as an example, these each have a focus that they bring. Out here on the edge, here's all of the planets, okay? We also have the mathematical point of the ascendant and your MC here, as well as the luminaries of the sun and the moon. There are more than 25,000 placements, but we're just going to talk about these really quick. Here are your big three. You know, when somebody's like, hey, what are your big three? This is what they're asking for. They want to know what your sun, your moon, and your rising. So what the sun represents in your chart is your ego, your true self. So where that sits, whatever sign it's under is the personality given to your ego. And where your ego is most affected is the house that it's in. As an example, right? In this one, we can see this person would be a Gemini sun. That's what it says. This is the house of value. Under the sign of Gemini, ego, right, is under the sign of Gemini. So expressive, we'll say. Expressive value. That's that person's ego. The moon is your emotion, okay? That is what it represents. And the moon actually is something that gets put into astrology and discussions and all that, because there are ancient cultures that use the moon until they figured out that the sun was a better timekeeper for longer periods and the moon was better for shorter periods because of its phases. So what's interesting is that with the moon itself, you can see that even though it represents emotion, it moves very quickly through each sign. It only takes about 2.5 days. That's what all these parentheses are representing, by the way, how fast it moves. Sun is 30 days. That's about how long each of the seasons are, right? Like we just entered Gemini season. That'll be about 30 days. The moon, however, goes through every single sign during Gemini season. Sometimes the same sign twice, right? What's going on there is that it's in all these different phases happen during a season, okay? What's interesting is that, as an example, I'm a Sagittarius moon, right? There's going to be a Sagittarius full moon coming up, but there's only a Sagittarius full moon when you're a Gemini sun. That's the only time you can be born under a Sagittarius full moon. Do you see what I'm saying? You can only be born as a Gemini new moon if you're a Gemini sun. And that applies to all, okay? So, interestingly, you can have, like I said, it's in the same, it goes through every single zodiac sign during the season, but having it in the same phase and sign is when you have your moon return. So that usually happens during your sun season every year. Right here, the rising sign, okay? We talked about that. That's your first impression. And we also talked about the fact that it moves very quickly. 2 hours because 12 signs, 24 hours in the day. Now let's move into the inner planets. So the inner planets are the ones that are with the sun before the asteroid belt. So the Earth is also included in there. And it goes, Mercury is the closest, then Venus, then us, then Mars. Mercury being the closest to the sun, what it represents is expression. It's in your chart, how you're expressing yourself. Now, it takes only 2 weeks to go 30 degrees, but it goes retrograde like 2-3 times a year, as we all know. Then when we go to Venus, Venus is your vulnerability. Your surrendering energy, if you will. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to go through a single sign, and it goes retrograde about every 18 months. Now, Mars, it represents your drive and what you want to be in control of. And because it takes 6 to 7 weeks to go through a single sign, you have your Mars return, or like an extra load of drive, if you will, every 2.5 years or so. That's what gives you an extra bump. Out past the asteroid belt, and the first two we're going to talk about are the two social planets, are Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is the first one that we hit, and it is the largest planet in our solar system. And guess what it represents? Expansion, luck, things like that. It takes about a year to go through a single sign. So every 12 years, you have a Jupiter return. Saturn has those rings around it, restriction. It's actually also results. It just basically wants you to get things done. It doesn't want you to do it, right? It's more about focusing than anything. And it takes about 2.5 years to go through a single sign. So that means every 28 years or so, you have something called a Saturn return. This is time for the universe to eliminate things that are no longer serving you in your life. Either you're going to do it or the universe is going to do it. That's the thing, is it feels so tough when you're going through it, but when you come out on the other side, it's cool. Now, let's go to the generational planets. So, in modern astrology, we include the generational planets. The reason why they don't feel like they're as effective in some things is that they take a long time to move through a single sign. That's why we call them generational planets in the first place. This is the thing, though. Hear me out. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were not discovered until much later than all of these other planets. Why? We didn't have the technology to see them yet. In fact, Pluto wasn't discovered until 1930, folks, okay? 1930. That's less than 100 years ago. But once we know where they are in the sky, retroactively, we know where they were, and going forward, we know where they're going to be. They're planets in our solar system. They absolutely have a huge impact. Our particle entanglements with the rest of the universe are definitely having particle entanglements with these planets. Uranus is the planet of rebellion and change, okay? So when we're talking about generational planets, as an example, people your age are going to have it in the same sign that you do, right? Let's say, as an example, you have it in Libra, right? So your generation, that group, that 7-year group or whatever, that their rebellion is focused on finding balance, right? So that generation, that's what their group focus is. What's your focus? Where Uranus lands in your chart, in which house it lands in. So wherever, if it's in the first, it's going to be self-rebellion. If it's in the second, it's you're rebelling through your value. If it's the third, it's your communication. Do you see what I'm saying? So where generational planets sit in your chart matters, because you have the same kind of feel as your whole generation, but each role is different depending on which house it's in. And Neptune is your intuition, the dreams that generation has. What's the unseen for that generation? And then Pluto is about transformation. What's the big transformation move that we're doing? Those are what each of those kinds of means. I'm going to tell you which of these rule, okay? So in modern astrology, Uranus now is the ruler of Aquarius, right? Aquarius used to be ruled by Saturn. Saturn still rules Capricorn. Neptune now rules Pisces. Pisces used to be ruled by Jupiter, which still rules Sagittarius. Pluto rules Scorpio, which used to be ruled by Mars. Mars still rules Aries. There's only 2 planets, that's Mercury and Venus, that still rule 2 signs. And when we talk about them, it's the internal and the external of them. Mercury, communication, for Mercury, we have Gemini and Virgo, right? Gemini is the external communicator, Virgo is the internal communicator. For Venus, the planet of love, we have Taurus and Libra. Taurus is the internal love, the cozy at home. Libra is the I love you external love. Whatever your rising sign is, if you know your rising sign, the planet that rules that is your ruling planet. If you like my teaching style at all, I have a book available on Amazon. It will be the only astrology book you need for reference for